Hi, I'm Kevin and welcome to another Vantage Essential English video. In this video, we're going to be talking about linking your presentation. When you move on from one part of your presentation to another part of the presentation, tell your audience. This way they don't get lost. In this video, we're going to give you the tools and techniques on how to do that. Linking a presentation. Sequencing. We use sequencers to show the number and order of the points of our message. For example, first, second, third, or words like then, next, after that, finally, lastly. Note that next, then, and after that can be used in any order and can be used more than once. Here are some examples. I've divided my talk into 3 parts. We're going to look at 4 main areas. There are 3 things to consider. We can see 4 advantages to this method. The project has 4 stages. There are 6 stages to the process. There are 3 kinds of sequencers can be used in the introduction of your presentation, in the introduction of your main body, and throughout your whole presentation as you go from one point to the next. There's some very common English signpost expressions that I'd like to share with you. You can use these easily to signal to your audience that you're going to go from one point of your presentation to the next point. Here are some common signpost expressions you can use in your very next presentation. To move on, to expand on, to digress, to go back, to recap, to conclude, to sum up, to turn to elaborate on. Match each function below with one of the signpost expressions that I just read. Each expression is used once. Number 1, when you want to make your next point. To move on. Number 2, when you want to change direction. To turn to. Number 3, when you want to refer to an earlier point. To go back. 4, when you want to repeat the main points. To recap. Number 5, when you want to give a wider perspective. To expand on. Number 6, when you want to do a deeper analysis. To elaborate on. Number 7, when you just want to give the basics. To sum up. Number 8, when you want to depart from your plan. To digress. Number 9, when you want to finish your talk. To conclude. Now you try to make your own signbook expressions. We'll give you the basic words, you complete the sentence. You may want to pause the video after we give you the basic words to formulate your answer. Number 1, moving on. Question. The U.S. market. Moving on to the question of the U.S. market. Number 2, expand the main points, our proposal. Expand on the main points of our proposal. 3, I'd like, recap the main points. I'd like to recap the main points. 4. Let's go back. Question. Clinical research methods. Let's go back to the question of clinical research methods. 5. Digress. A moment, let's consider alternatives. Digressing for a moment, let's consider the alternatives. 6. Going back the point we were discussing earlier. Going back to the point we were discussing earlier. 7. Let's turn our targets the next 5 years. Let's turn to our targets for the next 5 years. 8. I'd like turn our projections year 2017. I'd like to turn to our projections for the year 2017. 9. Go back. The main reason. Our partnership. The Japanese. To go back to the main reason for our partnership with the Japanese. 10. I'd like, expand that a little before we move on. I'd like to expand on that a little before we move on. What we've been talking about so far are oral clues, are oral signposts in signaling your presentation. There are also visual clues that you can use and use with your body language. Let me give you a few examples. You can also signpoint visually that you're moving on. Repeat the headline line that you use to introduce your topic. This helps to signal that you've come full circle. Move to a blank slide and use one of the verbal clues above. Turn over the paper you've used on a flip chart or clean the whiteboard to show that the information is no longer needed and you're moving on to the next point. Move from one position to the room to another, again using the verbal clue at the same time. If you don't use visual or verbal signposting cues to signal that you're about to move on, your audience will very quickly lose track of where you are. If they're not sure where you are, whether you moved on yet, they will soon lose interest. Let me finally give you some expressions and sentences that you can use to signal the main parts of your presentation. You can use these in your very next presentation. Ending the introduction. So that concludes the introduction. That's all for the introduction. Beginning the main body. Now let's move on to the first part of my talk, which is about. So first, to begin with, or to start with, ending parts within the main body. That completes, that concludes. That's all I wanted to say for now on. Beginning a new part. Let's move to, and then introduce the next part. Now I'd like to turn to, going on to, so now we come to, now I want to describe. This concludes our Essential English video on linking the parts of your presentation. Our next video is how to close your presentation. We look forward to seeing you then.